Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the local review body of the month of November. It's 10th of November. This is a virtual meeting. My name is Councillor Henry Anderson. I'm the convener of the local review body. Also with me on this virtual meeting is Councillor Drysdale and Councillor Wilson. Also with us today is Mr. Harrison, Planning Advisor to the LRB, who is not a part of the planning department, has no previous involvement with any of the applications that we have before us today. Also, we have as our legal advisor, Mr. Colin Elliott, and from committee services, we have Mr. Danny Williams. Before we commence the business of the day, can I inform you that the meeting will be recorded and will be available on the council's website. Can I ask that all microphones are muted and all electronic devices switched off or on silent mode? Right, can I ask if there's any declarations of interests on any item of today's agenda? Councillor Drysdale?
No, I have no declarations of interest.
Councillor Wilson?
Convener, no declarations of interest from me.
Yeah. Can we note the minute of the last meeting?
Agreed.
Okay, fine, thank you very much. Now we'll move on to the business of the day, and the first application for review is a planning application for extension to a dwelling house, 98 David Douglas Avenue, Scone. Can I ask Mr. Harrison to lead on the presentation for that? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. As you say, this is a detailed planning application for the erection of an extension at 98 David Douglas Avenue, Scone. The extension would be on the rear elevation of a semi-detached house. The plots and gardens slope down from front to back so that the rear patio doors of the houses exit onto shallow platforms and steps about a metre above the rear garden ground level. There is limited privacy for each of the households when entering and leaving by the adjoining patio doors. There is a 1.8 metre high timber screen fence between the gardens at the lower level. The proposed extension would be elevated above the rear garden areas. The extension would project some 4 metres and would be mainly across the width of the rear elevation. Access would be to the side away from the neighbouring house at number 96. It would present blank walls towards the neighbours on both sides. The rear elevation facing onto the garden would be largely glazed. And I'll just take you to the photographs now, but you might like to page 29 onwards, provide you with a location plan and a site plan and elevations. And I may just make a comment at this point that, of course, you have 2 sets of drawings, one submitted with the notice of review and the earlier pages, but page 29 onwards is the drawings which are in front of you today. The general sequence of the photographs will be the street frontage, as you see in the first photograph here, then the side elevation, and then rear elevations. So as I say, this is us standing looking across the street in front of both of the semi-detached properties, and you'll see, as it were, the adjoining house and the double garage on the right-hand side as we face it. And then we have the application site frontage identified in red. That's for number 98, of course. And then in the next photograph, we swing slightly to the left. We still catch, of course, number 98 and the frontage of the application site, but you can see the relationship with the adjoining garage and the adjoining dwelling house as well. From there, we then move into the driveway in the next photograph, and we're looking down the side of the gable of number 98. And of course, we pick up the garage of the adjoining property and the side elevation of the adjoining property there as well. The yellow lines give an indication of the small part of side extension there is that you'll see in your plans. From there, in the next photograph, we move down into the site, and that's now just opposite the end and entry into the gates we saw in the previous photograph. And this is us looking down the slightly sloping nature of the garden and its outlook to the, shall we say, the development of Scone beyond. And the yellow lines again show the, shall we say, the footprint of the proposed extension. From there, we move in the next photograph into the garden ground itself, looking back to where we were. And this, of course, gives us the rear of the house on the western side. And of course, you can see there's a screen fence as well as the side of the garage and outbuilding there as well on that side. And then if we swing slightly to the left in the next photograph, we again have the outline of the footprint of the proposed extension. And this illustrates, of course, the patio doors I referred to earlier, and then the side kitchen window, basically of that ground floor of the property. But you'll note that the ground floor is elevated above the garden level at this point. In the next photograph, we swing round to the left again. This gives us clear indication of the screen fence that I mentioned earlier and shows the relationship of the two patio doors of the semi-detached properties. Again, the outline of the actual proposed extension is shown in yellow. From there, if we step up a little bit in the next photograph, it just gives you a little bit more of a detail of the extent of the extension, if I can put it that way. That's the 4-meter projection. And of course, you have noted from the plans that the extension comes out at the, shall we say, the floor level you see of the platform of the patio doors. And then in the next photograph, we just get a little bit more detail of those patio doors and the platform on that rear elevation. And then if we move to the next photograph, it will just leave you with that for, shall we say, a general indication of the rear elevation of the building. Turning now in summary to the applicant's case, having considered the reasons for refusal, the applicant has requested that the LRB considers a revised proposal which reduces the projection of the extension from 4 to 3 metres and introduces a sloping roof with roof lights in place of the flat roof with a cupola. Drawings for this revised proposal have been submitted with the notice of review. This revised proposal would effectively be identical to that approved nearby at 5 Hutchison Drive. While the report of handling indicates that the 4-metre extension would not significantly overshadow garden ground, details have been submitted to show that a 3-metre extension would not cause any overshadowing. Reference is also made to a number of other extensions to houses within this estate which have received approval. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the house has a footprint of some 44 square metres and the extension would have a footprint of some 28 square metres. While this is proportionally large, it is not seen as excessive. The extension would have a flat roof with a cupola insert. The walls would be rendered to match the house and glazing would be on the garden elevation. Overall, the extension is seen as having a, and using inverted commas, boxy form of appearance. It is suggested that the design of the extension might be improved by the use of a partial hipped roof form. The first floor windows restrict the options for a different roof form. The extension would have significant underbuilding as the floor level is carried through. The overall height of the extension from the ground floor level would be over 4 metres. The officer concludes that the proposal does not respect the form or finish of the house and would be detrimental to the character and amenity of the area. These houses have a degree of overlooking of each other's properties from windows, patio doors and external access platforms. It is not considered that the extension would significantly increase overlooking. It is noted that the neighbour has not expressed any concern in that respect. However, the neighbour has expressed concern regarding overshadowing and the loss of daylight to their patio doors. The Council's draft placemaking guide accepts that, in many circumstances, a single-storey extension projecting 4 metres on the boundary would be acceptable. This proposal has been assessed under the BRE 45-degree daylight test, both in terms of its elevation and plan, namely in both a vertical and horizontal context. It is noted that the neighbouring ground floor room is served by both patio doors and a window. The patio doors are the main source of daylight. The officer concludes that the proposal would not meet the 45-degree test and would be detrimental to the daylight levels presently enjoyed by number 96. The level of overshadowing of garden ground is not assessed as significant. In addition, the presence of the blank wall is viewed as being intrusive and oppressive for the neighbouring property and would detract from its residential amenity. Turning to representations, a representation has been received expressing concern about the potential loss of daylight, the prominence of the extension, and the adverse impact on the value of his property. In this case, there is both a request for a site visit and for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. Councillor Drysdale, have you any questions on this for officers?
Yeah, just one at the moment, Convener, which is to Mr. Harrison, just to try and understand as best I can. Obviously, I've seen the drawings and now I see the photographs. The orientation of the sun in relation to the neighbouring property, and if you can just perhaps explain the orientation of the house and the normal direction of travel of the sun, just so that I can understand the length of daylight that that would potentially be less light through the patio doors of the neighbouring property.
Certainly. You might like to turn to page 29 at this point then. That gives you a site plan which gives the orientation of the property.
Yep.
And you'll see there's a north sign identified there. So as you'd expect, it's a north-south orientation of the sort of the layout of the housing. So you'll see the rear extension identified there. So effectively, the arc of the sun obviously runs from east to west and swings round here. So you would expect, shall we say, a greater degree of overshadowing from, for the sake of argument, from 12 o'clock onwards. That would reduce, but the house itself, of course, would not allow sunlight directly into the neighbours' adjoining patio doors until it swings round at least past about, late morning or beyond that. So the afternoon sun that they would enjoy, and so the extension would, to a degree, overshadow those patio doors in that afternoon period. But the patio doors don't actually enjoy direct sunlight, as it were, earlier on in the day. The reference here is to daylight rather than sunlight, and just for clarity, basically the orientation of that rear elevation is what you call a sunlight calculation. In other words, direct light shining in. So in other words, if you can imagine, you've got a completely north-facing elevation. It doesn't receive direct light. It only receives daylight, whereas a south-facing elevation will receive direct sunlight through the windows. So there's a slight distinction there. So in that sense, in the early part of the day, the patio doors adjoining would enjoy daylight, in other words, indirect light, until the sun comes round, and then obviously when you start getting into evening in the summer, it would be enjoying direct sunlight through the patio doors as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And if I can just again, just trying to visualize, and I do have the drawings in front of me, so I'm right in thinking that if we're again, we're looking at the rear elevation photograph there, and number 98's property patio doors. I'm just trying to get an overall impression of the scale of the proposed extension, and I'm presuming that these patio doors are somewhere slightly more than 2 meters, and therefore that the 4 meters height is taking you up to just below the upstairs windows. Would that be fair to say?
If you'd like to turn to page, just a couple of pages on from that, yep. To page 32, that will show you shall we say, the height of the top of the proposed extension relative to the neighbour's patio doors. It exceeds the height of the patio doors, as you rightly point out, and then on top of that there would be a glazed cupola.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, do you have any questions to ask?
Thanks, Convener, and yes, and thanks to Mr. Harrison for the presentation and the photographs, which are extremely helpful, as well as the papers. What we have before us is an application for an extension of approximately 4 meters in width out the way, but the applicant has submitted a alternative proposal for that to be 3 meters. That, I understand, hasn't been to the planning officer's convener, and my question is really to Mr. Harrison and to our legal advisor, Mr. Elliott, to give us advice that we need to make a decision on the plans that are submitted originally, that the planning officer has commented on, not the revised plans. Is that correct?
Yes, if I can clarify that, just to remove any doubt, the application, which is subject to review, and I stress the word review because that's of course the local review body, you can only be reviewing an application which has been dealt with by the planning officer and a decision made on that. The applicant was, I think, under the impression that having received the refusal, they could submit some revision, some alternative proposal for you to consider. That, shall we say, option is not really open to you because the degree, if I can put it that way, of revision they're suggesting amounts to something which would be a new planning application. And of course, the applicant has an entitlement to make a further application, irrespective of the outcome of today's deliberations. So to be clear, it is only the original, if I can call it that, submission to the planning authority that is before you, and you're perfectly correct that the planning officer has never given a view on the, shall we say, 3 meter alternative suggestion which the applicant has put forward when it's come to the notice of review stage.
Thank you.
Right, I have no questions myself because my 2 colleagues has sort of asked the questions that I was mulling over asking. So then members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us? That is information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning officer. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to continue?
Yes, I think with sufficient information, Convener.
Councillor Drysdale, are you happy to continue?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Convener.
Right, Councillor Wilson, I'll allow you to start the debate.
Thanks, Convener. Well, in all of these house extensions at the rear, it's always an idea if the applicant and the neighbours get together and want to do something together. However, that's in an ideal world, and we are where we are. This is for an individual extension, and as I've clarified with the planning advisor, we've got to judge the plans that are before us not the revised plans. And I say this with some degree of reluctance, convener, because I think I understand the aspiration of folk wanting to put on an extension to their house. However, on balance, I consider that the proposed extension is a bit big and a bit overbearing, and therefore I would be proposing to go along with the planner's recommendation for refusal. I think the reasons for refusal are reasonable, and that, as we've already said, would leave the applicant the opportunity to submit a further application that would be judged on its own merits, and I make no comment on that whatsoever. So I'm on page 19, convener, but if you want me to, that's the introduction. I'm happy to narrate some of the minor changes that I would suggest that we have in relation to some of the wording of the reasons for refusal, reasons 1 and 2, but I could leave that till later if you wish.
Yeah, we'll get the view of Councillor Drysdale before we move on to that. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I want to, I want to be able to, a property owner to improve and extend his property is something where, where possible. I think the default position would be that we would want to be supportive of that. However, I have to agree with Councillor Wilson here that this extension, this proposed extension, is a bit too large, and the overshadowing of the neighbouring property I have to say, with a blank wall as well, which kind of does make it more overbearing as well. I think I'm not keen on that. In my question, I explored the just to fully understand the relative height of the roof of the proposed extension relative to the neighbouring property and the size of the property itself. And again, on balance, it's a fine judgment, but on balance, I have to say that I do think it is too large, and I would support the officer's refusal that was originally given.
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale, and I concur with both the councillors there that yes, it's unsympathetic to its neighbours in design and massing. Obviously, it concerns me that you're denying neighbours your a daylight, and it's certainly support the officers and their reasons for refusal. And I'm sure Mr. Elliott will come back to us and slightly change the reasons of refusal to make them more up to date, because they refer to the first local development plan in 2014, and I think Councillor Wilson also had 1 or 2 changes to make. So yes, I'm afraid your application is unsuccessful, and yes, Councillor Wilson, I'll let you finish off with your changes to the reasons for refusal.
Thanks, convener. If we're unanimous in that decision, then I'm on page 19, and reason for refusal number 1. The 4th line should read policy 17 rather than policy RD1, and on the same line, it's the Perth Kinross Local Development Plan 2, 2019, I think is the date, and I think that's the revision. On the second reason for refusal, the last line, the letters, capital letters PM should come out of that. It should be just be policy 1A, and I think the PM with prefix in 1B. I think 1BC remains, and so both these capital letters PM would come out, and the LDP 2 2019 would apply as well. I think I've got that right, and that just updates the reasons, convener.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott, are you happy with that?
Yes, convener. The grounds for refusal do need updated because they refer to the old plan, but Councillor Wilson has articulated the changes which I would have been suggesting anyway.
Thank you. Well, we'll just move on now to the second item for us to consider, and it's a erection of a maintenance storage shed at land 100 metres northeast of the old church lowers. Mr. Harrison, can you lead on this? Give us a presentation, sorry.
Thank you again, convener. As you say, there's a detailed planning application for the erection of a maintenance oblique storage shed at land 100 metres northeast of Old Lawers Church by Lochte. The application site comprises part of a small field beside the loch shore. Access is via some 700 metres of an unsurfaced access track leading down through farmland from the A827. The proposed building would be located adjacent to the eastern area of the ruins of Old Lawers Village. The site for the building is generally flat and enclosed by trees. The building would be some 10 metres long by 4.5 metres wide, giving a footprint of some 45 square metres. The building has a monopitched form and would be clad externally in in vertical timber cladding. The southern elevation faces onto Lochte, and this would be glazed. This frontage would be served by a retractable decking area. It would be set on helical screw piles rather than excavated foundations. Internally, it would provide welfare facilities and storage accommodation. It would have composting toilet facilities, and any services would be provided by off-grid means. There would be no main services. I'll maybe just go to the photographic presentation now, but you might like to have page 85 onwards to provide you with location plan, a site plan, and of course the elevations. In addition to the photographs that I'm showing, of course, the applicant has submitted his own photographs as part of the documents. The general sequence of the photographs will be the access track, and as you see in the first photograph here, the entry from the public road. Then the ruins of the southern scheduled ancient monument area. Then the infield area, the site for the shed, and then what you might call the eastern or northern scheduled ancient monuments ruins. Finally, the burn and the foreshore. So as we have in the first photograph here, we have the access track leading from the public road, and this is us looking in a northeasterly direction. If we move on to the next photograph, this just gives you the visibility display looking in that northeasterly direction, and you'll see that the access track slopes away fairly sharply from the entry. Moving on to the next photograph, we're now looking in the opposite direction, just to give the visibility display in that direction as well, in that southwesterly direction. Then we go down the track a little bit in the next photograph. This is us looking up to that entry. Moving on to the next photograph, we swing round and we look down the upper section of the access track. And as you can see, it's an unsurfaced track, basically running down between farmland on each side, and of course there are a number of trees as well here. So the next photographs will take us further down the track. This is us more or less in the middle section. As you can see, it's quite an extensive track leading down to the shore, and that only gives you an approximate position of the site just to orientate you in relation to the woodland. We move on to the next photograph. We go further down the track Again, there is a, shall we say, a lower section of the track as we get down to the more level area around the Loch shore edge. And again, further down the track in the next photograph, we get to that lowest section where it flattens out, as it were, and as we approach the main area of the village as it was. So moving on from that in the next photograph, that takes us into the what might be called the western area of the scheduled monument site, and this will give you an indication in the whole sequence of photographs now of both the ruins themselves and the extent of mature trees and other shrubs of various sorts which have invaded the ruins. So this is the area for the House of Lors and the Old Lors Church, just to be precise. So if we move on to the next photograph, and then the next photograph after that, these are all just to illustrate the nature of what is on the site at present. And then the next photograph, the more substantial gable part of the buildings. But you of course can see the extent of the invasion by both vegetation and trees. Move on to the next photograph. Give indication of that again. And the next photograph, please. Then the next photograph. This is us now following the access route to the application site. We're still at that end of the village, as it were. And then if we move to the next photograph, carry on up, we now move into more of the open area and the general access route to the site of the proposed building itself. In the next photograph, swinging to the right of that, we again see the open field and the general position of the site. And swinging again in the next photograph to the right of that, we see the actual shoreline on Lochte itself and the field in between the two areas of the scheduled ancient monuments. Moving on from that, and shall we say up from that as well, we move into the field itself, and you'll notice the access route is basically cutting diagonally across the field to the site itself. And you can see the degree of tree enclosure there on the one side and the openness of the field on the other side. This is looking in a northeasterly direction. Moving on from that, we get a little bit closer. You can see the frontage of the site onto the application site, that is. The land in the foreground, of course, is all in the applicant's ownership. It's just that within that, the red line area is defined as a smaller area. So that's the front of the site onto the loch itself. And then swinging round to the right of that, we look across the field and the access road to give you a feel for that. Swinging round again to the right of that photograph, we're now looking back to the area of the village we saw in the earlier photographs. Moving on from that photograph, we now just step for a moment onto the Loch shore, and you can see the general position of the application site relative to the shoreline. In the next photograph, please, we're now looking at the other ruins at the, as it were, the eastern end of the village as it was, and just to give you an indication of them, similar sort of position in terms of the ruinous state of the buildings and also the presence of the trees and vegetation. Swinging round to the right of that photograph, we see more of those ruins, and again swinging round to the right of that photograph, we catch the, shall we say, the application site itself, which extends beyond the main part of the ruins. Moving on from that, in the next photograph, please, we see, I say, in slightly more detail some of the ruins. And again, moving on from that, the next photograph, just further details of the ruins and the trees involved. Move on to the next photograph. Again, just further detail, slightly more open area of the ruins. And in the next photograph, again, more detail of the ruins and also the difference in levels there are in the site to some extent. And then in the next photograph, more of a detail of that. Further on, just showing the general nature of the ruin. And moving on from that to the next photograph. Just for clarity, there's a burn which is on that eastern side. And then in the next photograph, I'll just leave you with that general photograph of the application site and its context. Turning first of all to the applicant's case, the building would be used for storing materials, tools, equipment and amenity facilities in support of the work envisaged concerning the removal and management of trees and vegetation and the stabilisation of the ruins of Old Lord's Village, a scheduled ancient monument site. The scale of the building has been designed and positioned and natural cladding, timber cladding chosen so that it does not detract from the scheduled ancient monument or the local landscape. It is seen as fulfilling the definition of a hut as recreational accommodation, as the floor area is seen as less than 30 square metres. The proposal should be assessed in that context. In terms of associated processes, the applicant has a memorandum of understanding with the Brownfield Heritage Society regarding the removal of trees and invasive vegetation. A further schedule regarding the stabilising of the ruins will need to be agreed with Historic Environment Scotland. Both schedules would then be agreed with the Perth Kinross Heritage Trust. There is also an intention to apply for scheduled ancient monument consent. All of this and the archaeological investigation would follow on from the granting of planning permission for this proposal. The building is seen as enabling these works to be undertaken. Such work would have a positive heritage impact. The applicant has indicated that this work would be undertaken by himself at weekends and during holidays and at his expense. The provision of welfare facilities is seen as a requirement for site workers under HSE guidance. It is noted that there are no objections from third parties. This is seen as indicating that the applicant has responded to the objections to the previous proposal for container units. The previous proposal for container units for the same purpose was refused. This has led to the applicant proposing a high quality design for this proposal. The officer accepts that the building is of a high quality of design. This is seen as being at odds with the view that it is inappropriate to its setting. It is requested that little weight is given to the officer's view and that more weight is given to the views of Historic Environment Scotland and the Brownfield Heritage Society. The building has been designed to be capable of being used for other purposes, subject to obtaining further planning permission, or being relocated elsewhere if such permission was not forthcoming. The design of the building for temporary purposes has not been proposed due to the applicant's concern regarding the impact that would have on the surrounding landscape. The applicant has suggested that if permission was being granted, it could be for a temporary period of 5 years, conditional on obtaining approval of the necessary schedules and other consents, and limiting the use to storage and maintenance purposes. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling. The application site lies within the Brownfield environmentally sensitive area, the River Tay Special Area of Conservation and the Lochte Special Landscape Area. The proposal is adjacent to Old Lord's Village, a scheduled ancient monument. While works that help to preserve the scheduled monument ruins would be welcome, the scale of the building, like the previous proposal for containers, is seen as excessive in relation to the storage requirements for the tree and conservation works envisaged. Perth Kinross Heritage Trust object to the proposal, and the Council's Biodiversity and Tree Officer does not consider the building necessary to enable the tree works envisaged to be carried out. Both the scale and high quality and nature of the building design means that it could readily be used for holiday or recreational purposes with minimal alteration. The proposed large glazing elevation facing Lochte, the substantial decking area and the kitchen and toilet facilities are seen as supporting this view. In practice, a planning condition seeking to limit the use of the building to storage and maintenance purposes only is not expected to be enforceable. The planning history of the site includes a proposal for a dwelling house, which was refused. This proposal is for a permanent rather than a temporary building. Taking these factors together, the officer is of the view that there is significant doubt as to the intended use of the building, and the granting permission may set a precedent for other development. It is recognised that, by itself, the building is of a high quality of design, especially for a storage shed. However, the modern appearance of the building is seen as inappropriate and would have some impact on the setting of the scheduled monument. The Old Lawers village has remained unchanged for a long time. Such a modern element could, to a degree, compromise the appreciation of the former village, even although views between the different elements of the monument would be largely unaffected. The proposal is not viewed as raising concerns in relation to access, flooding, residential amenity, or significant impact on the wider landscape designations. It is noted that scheduled monument consent, which would be required for works to the structures, has not, as yet, been obtained. In this case, regarding representation, there has been one objection from the Perth Kinross Heritage Trust concerning the prospective impact on the nationally important site and its setting. In this case, there is both a request for a site visit and for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison, for that. Councillor Wilson, do you have any questions on this application for officers?
Thanks, Convener, and thanks again to Mr. Harrison for the presentation. I have two questions. First of all, how far in terms of meters distance is the proposed site from the main part of the Lawyers complex, if I can call it that, the old kirk and the old mansion house?
Well, there is reference to this to some extent in the papers, that there has been some, shall we say, reconsideration of the area covered by the ancient scheduled monument. So it would appear that the application site effectively abuts the area designated for the ancient monument. And I think you actually have a plan in your papers. I'll maybe just see if I can get this to hand quickly. I think it's in the documentations. On page 151, that assists you. This is part of the consultation response from Historic Environment Scotland. And you see the area shaded dark as the scheduled area. The application site effectively abuts that, if that helps you.
Is the reason for the distance to avoid disturbing any remains of the village? There's reference to the village being reconfigured in the 18th century at some stage, is to avoid disturbance of any material that might be hidden at the moment but would be germane to any large-scale excavation in the future.
And I think so, yes. If you were minded to grant consent for this, there would be an expectation that there would have to be a condition dealing with the, shall we say, the prospect of any additional archaeological find out with the scheduled area, because of course it's in direct proximity to it. The applicant, of course, has made a point, as I think I mentioned, of saying that the foundation work that they're envisaging is about the minimum they could have to support a building of this sort. So they're not talking about major trench foundations, and that is part of the design that they've submitted. But the site itself is, as you can see, literally abutting the scheduled monument area as designated, and therefore there is, of course, the prospect that other things may be found in the due course of the development.
Indeed, thank you. My second question relates to the specification for the work. There's a fair volume of material here that tells us about the tree work in relation to removal of trees or coppicing, etc. But what I don't see an awful lot of is any reference to guidance from either the National Trust or any other historic environment, Scotland, or in fact the Perth Kinross Heritage Trust, about advice, guidance, or a specification for works on the buildings themselves, whether it would be mortar work or careful restoration or in some cases removal for safety reasons, etc. Have I missed something in the papers in that, Mr. Harrison? Because I could find a little bit of detail, but not any detailed specification that matches the detailed specification for the tree work.
I think you've summarised that to such an extent. I have nothing to add. I don't think the information you're talking about is in your papers. You mentioned mortar there. Without going into any detail, I get the impression that the majority of the buildings, if not all of them, have been built at a period where they were built in a, shall we say, a dry stain way rather than in a mortared way. And certainly, even if you turn to page 121, for example, which gives you a little detail of the structure, in addition to the photographs you've got, certainly the type of wall would appear to be a dry stone wall in terms of its construction, as illustrated there. I certainly didn't get the impression that there is much, if any, mortar used in the construction of certainly the lesser buildings.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Councillor Drysdale, have you any questions on this proposal?
Thanks, Convener, and thanks again to Mr. Harrison. They do say a picture tells 1,000 words, and a lot of photographs there have significantly improved my appreciation of the area and the remoteness and indeed its beauty next to Lochte. So thanks for that. That's given me a good understanding of the overall area. Can I turn just one question, really, just in terms of the maintenance oblique storage shed itself and its design. As I understand it, and just looking for either your confirmation or to correct me, the facility, as you explained in your narrative, is glazed, looking towards Lochte, and has a what could be described as a decking area on the opposite side of the construction. The construction itself doesn't appear to have a large amount of area for storage, and I'm curious to understand what kind of things would be stored there, and indeed the scale of the project that is envisaged to preserve the historical site. Looks to me to be a major exercise, and I'm just wondering whether it really is feasible to be able to manage such a project from such a relatively modest storage facility, which is in itself not inaccessible, but difficult to access by anything other than a light vehicle.
You're touching on almost management and, shall we say, the control of site works issues, which are really almost getting a little bit beyond the papers, and as Councillor Wilson has mentioned on the in terms of the works to the actual scheduled monument fabric itself, we really don't have much information on that. Yes, that's, if you like, the judgment before you, and it's maybe not appropriate for me to comment on the, should we say, the scale of the development relative to the works envisaged as far as you're able to understand them. you touch on the question of access. Hopefully the photographs were helpful in that context. Whether or not the applicant intends to improve that or not is not say part of your proposals, and yes, there would be some limitation on the type of vehicle that could reasonably use that access. I think maybe hopefully the photographs would have given you is an indication of the extent to which the tree work is possibly quite a specialist area. First of all, to deal with something of some of these trees would probably involve arboriculturalist skills and tree surgeon skills, especially in the context of trying to undertake the work without causing further damage beyond what the trees have done to the scheduled monument itself. So it's possibly quite a specialist area of work if it's to be done sensitively and in a manner which doesn't cause damage to the scheduled monument. Having said all that, I'm really, as a precursor to saying, I find it difficult to answer your question as to whether or not the storage facility as identified on the plan on page 90 is actually proportionate or adequate for the type of work that's envisaged here, which may well involve people bringing specialist equipment to the site to undertake it, and maybe, specialist skills as well. I'm sorry if that's a slightly vague response, but I don't want to exceed what is actually in your papers and to speculate, if you feel like, and put it that way, too far beyond that.
No, I understand, and I could have been a lot more precise in my questioning. No, thank you. You've helped my overall understanding of the proposals and of the site. And as I say, the photographs are particularly useful in just gaining a full appreciation of not just the site of the proposed construction, but also the overall area itself.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I have maybe two questions. First question, on page 81, there's a reference here to an off-grid hut from the applicant. I think it's the applicant anyway. Can you give me clarity? This is not an application for an off-grid hut, is it? It's for a storage and maintenance and storage shed. Is that correct? So,
yes. First of all, yes. The letter you're referring to on page 81, which of course goes on for a couple of pages, is from the applicant. Just to clarify that, part of his overall submission. And on page 83, as part of that letter, we have the definition of a hut, which, as it says there, the hutting and Scottish planning policy reference in terms of the glossary at the back of that gives this definition. Now, I couldn't help note that in terms of the physical dimensions of the accommodation, it refers to 30 square meters, whereas the area of the actual building, irrespective of the decking area, which can go up and down, exceeds somewhat. It's something in the order of 45 square meters. So it wouldn't appear to, shall we say, immediately fall within that definition. It certainly, from the applicant's description, is a suggestion that the building would only be used intermittently, because he refers to the holiday and weekend type use. And clearly there is as he says, a welfare aspect to it. I'm not quite sure where welfare begins and ends and recreational accommodation begins and ends, but I don't think there's any suggestion it would be a permanent residence if we're just looking at the definition there. But in any event, the application has been very much presented in the context of it being a facility to enable works to be done to trees and the ruined buildings, rather than it being a recreational accommodation as such. Although there are aspects of the building itself in terms of its design which would suggest it's more than, should we say, just simply 4 walls in order to accommodate the storage of materials or equipment.
Thank you. And going on, referring to the building rather than a hut, it's a considerable glass frontage. If we were minded to grant, would there not be an issue with light pollution across the loch that we've had with various other buildings that we've had applications for? I know the officer hasn't touched on that, but there's a lot of glass there. Would that not be an issue as well?
Well, certainly if the building was being used in hours of darkness, then that would be the case. It's not on mains electricity, as far as no intention of that as far as we know, but that of course doesn't prevent it having some sort of lighting system. In short, I appreciate the officer has made no comment about that, but it certainly would be an integral part of the design of the building if it was being used during hours of darkness.
Thank you for that. Members, can we proceed to determine this application for review based on the information that is before us? That is information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Councillor Wilson, are you happy to move forward?
Thanks, Convener. Given the information we've had today and the fairly voluminous information in the papers, I'm happy to proceed, Convener.
Councillor Drysdale, are you happy to proceed?
Yeah, similarly happy to proceed. Thank you.
Are you comfortable to lead the debate?
Yeah. So, from my point of view, what we have here is an environmentally very sensitive area, an area of special beauty, and we need, as a planning authority and as a local review body, to be very careful that we do not permit developments which may forever change or may even temporarily significantly alter that area of beauty. I've noted in particular the objections of Perth Kinross Heritage Trust, and I share their disquiet as regards the impact that this facility would have on the overall amenity of the place. We talk a lot in planning terms about placemaking, and this is a very special place, and I wouldn't I wouldn't be supportive of something that is going to materially change that. Do you wish me to proceed to my proposals, Convener?
We'll hear the other ones, and then we'll get you and Mr. Elliott to finish off, if that is the way it goes. Councillor Wilson. Thanks,
Convener. I'm actually fairly familiar with the site because I did spend a weekend in the Old Law School a few years ago, before you say so, Convener. But the essence of the thing is that this is a particularly sensitive area. I'm not convinced at all that there is a need for a building of this size or type on site. I take on face value that the owner and the applicant wishes to carry out work on the scheduled monument. I've no doubt about that whatsoever. But the evidence we've had placed before us today is that there's a substantial amount of tree work needing done, and an undefined amount of work to the buildings, which we really have no information on. I would have thought that, given the nature of the tree work, and this is referred to in some of the correspondence, that it would be at least in part, necessary for a specialist contractor to come in here. There's a danger if you were taking down trees, you would actually cause more damage than would do good. And I think a contractor would bring their kit on site and probably take it away with them again. These are extremely valuable things. The building that I've seen, I don't think is secure. I think it's too large and quite honestly too luxurious. If it were a sturdy wooden hut, but that's not what we're applying for, convener. You'll tell me that, or that's not what's been applied for. With strong security, then maybe that would be a different kettle of fish. I'm not convinced this is the right way to approach the thing, and I'm uncomfortable about giving assent to this building being placed on site, because I don't think it's suitable for the job that has been envisaged. And I concur with Councillor Drysdale's conclusion that we should not uphold the review.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Yeah, I visited the site and I was very disappointed in what I saw on the site, because there is no fencing up, which is needing done immediately to keep cattle out from the site. You could hardly walk through it because it was all what we would call in agricultural terms podged up with cattle being around it in very wet weather. There was also evidence of stone being dumped there and fencing. So I think that the Redalban Heritage Society and the various other organisations really need to look at some form of doing something. However, what is being proposed and what's in front of us is not the answer to what is required, and I see no reason why we would consent to allowing this so-called maintenance storage shed being put there. I think actually getting it in there would probably do more damage than good. Being experienced in forestry and actually being one of the last contractors to take timber out of Queen's View with a tractor, after that it was done by a horse, I appreciate how sensitive these areas is. And yes, it would have to be, these trees that's in amongst the ruins would have to be climbed and sectioned and taken down piece by piece by rope and man and rope if we were to preserve any of the stone there. That is very specialist, far more specialist than the way I worked back in the 80s, and certainly that's the way I would see it. The walls and the buildings are dry stone. That's a specialist job too to be done. I cannot see how this particular plan would work in that. So therefore I am quite happy to allow Councillor Drysdale to move forward with any points he wants to make along with Mr. Elliott. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. So I mean, I think you know, I'm content to support and to endorse the reasons for refusal given by the planning officer in March, and if I may summarise these as follows: that the proposal is contrary to policies 1A and 1B, the placemaking policies of the Local Development Plan 2 of 2019, and there is no justification for a shed, if that's what it is, of this scale in this highly sensitive location. It would be of detriment, as I've said in my earlier remarks, to what is a very special and beautiful place, the local environment on the shores of Lochte. And as such, the proposal doesn't contribute positively to the quality of place, and indeed does detract from its character and amenity. Further, I agree that the proposal is contrary to policy 26A, the scheduled monuments and archaeology of the LDP2. This is a contemporary, quite luxurious isn't the word, but it's a decent facility here, and nobody would, if this was in an appropriate location, nobody would bat an eye about this this facility. It is good looking, but it is completely out of place alongside the historical site of the old village and church, and it would introduce a modern element into a facility, into an area that has been largely unchanged for 300 or more years, and there's no exceptional circumstances here, I would say, that would require us to look exceptionally at approving this construction. There's also the issue of precedent that would be created, and the last thing that that I would like to see in this special, beautiful location is a proliferation of similar constructions or anything like that in what is an outstanding area of natural beauty, and so I see no reasons whatsoever for exceptionally allowing this facility. And as I say, I support the planning officer's original refusal decisions.
Convener, if I could come in terms of being the legal advisor on the actual terms of the grounds of refusal, I'd ask members to have a look at a couple of things. First of all, on ground 1, there's reference to policies 1A and 1B. Now, policy 1B, as members will know, has subdivision or criteria, and I would normally ask members to consider specifying the actual subdivisions. Now, I've had a look at it, and it would appear that it's 1B, B and C in terms of that ground of refusal, and if members are content, that would be amended to policies 1A and 1B, and in brackets B, and then again in brackets C. So it's just giving that detail that isn't there already. The only other comment I would have is ground 2, and it's a little bit much your choice. It's about wording here, is the third last line, whether you want to add in the word the, so it's therefore compromise the appreciation of the monument. That's not essential, but it's something for your consideration. Otherwise, I have really no comments. It's really whether members want to tidy up the grounds 1 and 2 in that way.
I would be fully supportive of that, Mr. Elliott, and looking at the detail of policy 1B, as you say, paragraphs B and C, consider and respect site topography and any surrounding important landmarks, views or skylines, as well as the wider landscape character of the area. That's exactly what we're talking about here. And also the design and density should complement its surroundings in terms of appearance, height, scale, massing, materials, finishes and colours. And again, in my opinion, this proposal does not satisfy these criteria, and I would also support the minor amendment that you narrated there in terms of the second point.
Okay.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah, Councillor Wilson.
I'm content.
Okay, thank you, Convener.
Can I suggest we have a break now? 10 minutes, 5 minutes? What do the members feel?
5 minutes would do, convener?
5 minutes?
Back
5
at
minutes,
11:45.
after that?
Yep. Okay.
Right, we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Is that everyone back and ready to go?
Trying to indicate I was here, but I got muted again, but that's fine.
Yeah, and Eric, you're back and ready to go, and yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I think everyone's here. So will we move on to the next item, which is setting up a hut in principle at land 70 metres north of the steading Keltney Burn. Mr. Harrison, will you give the presentation on this one?
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a planning application in principle for the erection of a hut at Keltney Burn by Aberfeldy. Planning permission has been granted for this development. This appeal, as it were, relates to conditions 2 and 3 of the planning permission only. These concern the personal nature of the consent and the extent of the permitted use of the hut. The application site is part of a field. The field is surrounded by farmland and woodland, with the exception of 2 houses lying on the outskirts of the main group of buildings forming Keltney Burn. These houses are close to the southern boundary of the site. From the application plans, the field, which includes some mature trees on the southwestern boundary, would appear to form the extent of the applicant's land ownership at this location in the main. There are no details of the prospective building or its position within the application site beyond illustrative sketches. Access to the site is onto the public road via some 300 metres of a steep, unsurfaced, single-width track. I'll just take you through some photographs now, just to give you some of the background, but you might like to have page 85, which provides you with the location plan, site plans as well. The photographs will basically show the field in general, then the site itself and the surrounding area. So looking at the first photograph we have here, this shows the lower part of the field, and you can see it's an open area of ground with a certain amount of woodland surrounding it as well. And this is taken from a position on the access track. And if we swing round in the next photograph towards the right of that photograph, we now look across the remainder of the field, as it were, from the corner, looking in a westerly direction. The red line obviously indicating in general form the application site itself, and of course you can see the tree within the application site identified in this photograph too. We move round in the next photograph towards the right again. This shows you the access track leading up to the entry into the application site. It also shows the land on the northern side of the land holding which the applicant has, which is a mixture of woodland and open space. We move up the access track in the next photograph. We now look down from within the application site back to where we saw in the earlier photographs, and this gives you a general indication of the landform looking in the easterly direction. The blue line, of course, giving an indication of the remainder of the field in the applicant's ownership. You're just catching the edge of the tree I mentioned earlier within the application site on the right-hand side of the photograph there. So if we swing round to the right of that in the next photograph, I say we get the tree again and the bush as well, and we see approximately the lower part of the application site, and then the remainder of the field beyond that in the applicant's ownership. And you may just also be beginning to pick up a building as well on the extreme right-hand side of the photograph there too. So moving on and swinging round again to the right of that photograph, we see the main building, which is called the steading, which you'll see in your location plan. The extent of the application site shown approximately in red, and of course again the blue line showing the remainder of the field. And you can see there are, shall we say, elevated views across the glen at this particular point. This is us looking in, generally speaking, in a southerly direction. Again, from the same position, swing round to the right of that. In the next photograph, we look towards some of the trees on the far boundary within the applicant's ownership. We see the remainder of the application site, and of course, further land in the applicant's ownership and the remainder of the field beyond. And as it were, you can see the ground beginning to rise to the northern side of the access track at that point. So if we swing round to the right again of that photograph in the next slide, we say we're looking up in more northerly direction now. I say a mixture of open ground and trees, which I mentioned earlier as well. And as you can see, the ground rises quite significantly from the access track beyond. In fact, you can just pick up the access, a little bit of the access track as it rises up on the extreme left-hand side of the photograph there, the small grey area. So we move on to the next photograph. Oh, I beg your pardon. Thank you. That just leaves you with a general impression of the application site and the remainder of the field. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case. In the applicant's view, conditions 2 and 3 are seen as disproportionate, obstructive, unreasonable, unenforceable, and without foundation or precedent in planning or legal terms. While the review requests that the conditions are removed, alternative wording is also suggested for consideration by the LRB. Turning first of all to condition 2, which currently reads, "This permission shall inure solely for the benefit of Mr. Peter Allen and not for the benefit of the land." The associated reason states, due to the nature of the development, this should be a personal permission only to ensure that the development accords with Scottish planning policy definition of a recreational hut. Planning permission relates to the land rather than a person. It is not considered that the link between a recreational hut and a personal planning permission has been explained or justified in the context of Scottish planning policy of 2014. As the applicant is in his mid-70s, it is considered necessary for there to be a provision for succession. If members are minded to retain a condition, an alternative wording is suggested, and that might read as follows. This permission shall inure solely for the benefit of the land and Mr. Peter Allen and his successors. The associated reason might state, due to the nature of the development, this should be a personal permission. Turning now to condition 3, this currently reads, the development hereby approved shall be used solely for the benefit of the personal recreational enjoyment of Mr. Peter Allen and his spouse, partner or family member only, and shall not be used as their sole or main residence, shall not be used for any other person or persons, or shall the hut be sold or let out to any other third persons. The associated reason currently states, in order to control and restrict the use of the building. Turning to the applicant's comments, the application took 11 months to be determined. The condition does not explain why such an unusual level of control over the use is necessary. It is unclear if one of the applicant's adult children or their partner would be entitled to use the building. The condition is seen as obstructing the construction of the hut, as it would be seen as unviable and removes the benefit of the planning consent. If members are minded to retain the condition, an alternative wording is suggested that might read, the development hereby approved shall be used solely for the benefit of the personal recreational enjoyment of Mr. Peter Allen and his spouse, partner or family members and guests. The associated reason might state, in order to control the use of the building and the associated land. Turning now to the officer's report of handling, in summary, the report of handling relates to the assessment of the proposal leading to the planning approval that has been issued. In that sense, it is not a direct response to the grounds of the appeal as such. The indicative proposal for the building correlates to Scottish planning policy in terms of the definition of a hut. The proposal is for a private recreational hut as defined by SPP. It is not a dwelling house. It would be for the personal use of the applicant and would not be his sole or main residence, nor would it be sold or rented out to a third party as a commercial holiday accommodation. This has been confirmed within the planning statement and the supplementary correspondence with the applicant. The officer considers that placing conditions controlling the use of the hut in that context and making this a personal planning consent accords with Scottish planning policy. Local Development Plan 2, Policy 8, concerning rural business and diversification, is not therefore applicable in this context. The assessment of the proposal in terms of land use mainly concerns any potential visual, residential and nature conservation impacts. While concern has been expressed that the granting of consent may lead to proposals for more huts at this location, this application is only for a single hut. Proposals for any further huts or for the hut to be used for commercial purposes would require a planning application to be submitted, and that would be considered on its merits. The site is relatively remote and enjoys fine views. It lies within the Lochte special landscape area. While open to the surrounding field, its position against a wooded backdrop is considered to be suitable for a development of this scale. The site lies adjacent to an SSSI and an SAC, which raises potential nature conservation sensitivities. The prospective impacts are considered to be controllable through planning conditions and a construction method statement, and provided the use of the hut remains recreational and is not used as a commercial accommodation or as a permanent residence. In such circumstances, as a recreational hut, the building would not be expected to be used on a daily basis, and possibly not on a weekly basis either. It is unusual for such a small-scale development to be the subject of an in-principle planning application. This has made the assessment of the proposal challenging and is seen as making it critical to ensure that suitable planning conditions are imposed reflecting the SPP definition and the purpose of the recreational hut in all respects. Specifically, conditions concerning occupancy, the building's scale, engineering works, and lacking services. In particular, and unusually, the planning permission has been made personal to the applicant. The proposal does not raise concerns regarding access, residential amenity, flood risk, or cultural heritage. Details of the building design, materials, pollution, sediment control, drainage and track improvements, parking and access would be assessed at a later planning application stage. In this case, turning to representations, during the processing of the planning application, 3 objections were received, mainly concerning the proposal being a house by any other name and the prospect of further development and impacts regarding access and nature conservation. The local community council expressed similar grounds for concern and objection. However, their objections were withdrawn once it was confirmed that SNH did not object and assurances were given that conditions would be applied concerning the occupancy of the hut. In addition, a letter of support for the proposal was also submitted on behalf of the 1,000 Huts for Scotland campaign. In this case, there is no request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Harrison. I'll start the questioning with myself first. There is no current policy at PKC for Pacific hutting. That is correct, isn't it?
That's correct. There's nothing within your local development plan as such at the present.
Yes. So, yeah. Thank you for that. Councillor Wilson, do you have any questions on that?
I have no questions on this one, Convener.
Councillor Drysdale, have you any questions on this one?
No, I have no questions either. Thank you.
Right. Well, just give me a second, and we will go through the proper procedure. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us? That is information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Are we happy to proceed, Councillor Wilson?
Happy to proceed, Convener.
Happy to proceed, Councillor Drysdale?
What's my name? Yes.
Sorry about that. Momentary lapse. I will start the debate. And I've listened carefully to this, and it's basically it's been granted, and the applicant doesn't like the conditions that planning has put upon it. However, because this is quite a new phenomena, hutting, though it's been on the go for many years, there seems to be a resurrection in hutting, and I think we have to encourage hutting in various areas as long as it's in the right place and it's done in the right way. I think that our planners have went about their duties in a very cautious and correct way, and I think that the fact that the planners have said it's to the benefit of the applicant rather than the benefit of the land, it makes sense. It makes sense because this is the way we want it to move forward. If we're going to do hutting, we need to ensure that. And I mean, the applicant's immediate family still have access to the hut, but it protects us from it becoming a commercial venture. So therefore, I would uphold the decision by the planners in this case. Councillor Drysdale.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I completely agree with what you've just said there, Convener. That we should indeed uphold the original decision. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. We're in new territory, and we're also in, to a degree, difficult territory because many people have an ambition to have somewhere to go in the countryside, and it's very often very difficult in planning terms to make assessments of these applications. I think there's sufficient protection for both the planning process and the applicant in these conditions, and I don't accept the view that the applicant has taken that he cannot have or the facility cannot be enjoyed by his family. It's quite clear in what's written in the papers that he and his spouse, partner and family can enjoy the facility, and therefore I think there's a reasonable balance struck in the conditions that allows it to be personal use and family use, but as you have indicated, Convener, it avoids the potential development of commercial use, and therefore I support the planning officers on this one and your motion.
Thank you. So that's all three are in. We are all in the same mood that we are upholding the officer's decision. Mr. Elliott, there's a spelling mistake in number 2, which is said ensure when it should be inure. I don't think there's any other points, but you being the expert on that will maybe correct me on my assumptions.
Yes, Convener, I think what you're saying, Convener, and I'll ask the other councillors in a second, but essentially on the minutes you are refusing the review application unanimously. However, there is a spelling mistake in the existing condition 2. I'm looking at page 169 of your papers, which contains the decision notice. So I think I would agree. My suggestion is that needs tidied up. In a sense, it's kind of a partly allowing the review, but it's only for technical purposes to tidy up that spelling mistake. And it's simply where the word ensure, you delete the S so it becomes inure. So I think I'm looking to Councillor Wilson and Drysdale whether they agree with that.
Yes,
Agree.
I agree with that. Thank you.
Well, without ado, then we shall move on. If Mr. Elliott, yeah, you're ready to move on. We'll move on to the next item, which is erection of a dwelling house in principle. Land 70 metres northeast of Dunvegan, Great North Road, Blair Adam. And Mr. Harrison, I'll allow you to do the presentation on this one.
Again, thank you, Convener. As you say, it's an application for planning permission in principle for the erection of a dwelling house at land 70 metres northeast of Dunvegan, Great North Road, Blair Adam. The site extends to some 1,700 square metres. It lies in a backland position behind two 1950s houses situated in the countryside. Access to the proposed plot will be between these two houses using an existing entry which serves the neighbouring house Dunvegan. I might like to go straight to the photographs now, but pages 261 and 262 will provide you with the location plan and site plan. You see in the first photograph here, this is the view of land in the applicant's ownership from the public road frontage. We'll then move on to photographs of the existing houses, then the access, and then the application site, the adjoining land, and the ancillary buildings. So in the first photograph, this is, as I say, standing out on the public road, and this is part of the adjoining land. We're looking, generally speaking, in a southerly direction, that's towards Kelty, as it were, and we're looking at the trees which enclose the additional land in the applicant's ownership. If you're looking at the location plan, that's the land between his house and the burn, as it were. So in the next photograph, we'll swing slightly to the left of that. We see the applicant's house, which is Brookside, at that frontage, and you'll see that it has its own access. Beyond that, you'll see the trees which, shall we say, follow the line of the burn that I mentioned earlier. And we're just catching the corner of the shared access, which would be the access to the application site. So swinging round to the left in the next photograph, again we catch the corner of that entry, but we see the other house, that's Dunvegan. You'll have noted by this stage that the two houses are almost mirror images of each other, and were built round about the same time. So we now swing round to the right of that. We get both the houses and we look directly down the access road. And this is the access road which at the moment serves Dunvegan. That's the property on the left-hand side of the photograph as we look at it. So in the next photograph we go, excuse me, down the access road a bit. This is us now behind the houses, and the access track goes beyond them down towards the land beyond, say, in that backland position. So you can see obviously the garden ground as with the greenhouse for Dunvegan on the left-hand side of the photograph, and then other small outbuildings associated with Brookside on the right-hand side of the access road. So in the next photograph, if we go down the access, we're now at the entry into the main part of the application site. This is the northern area of the application site. And then there'll be a sequence of photographs now swinging round to the right of that. So we move from there and we look directly opposite the entry into the main body of the application site. And as you see, there's a row of conifers on that boundary with the field beyond. And in the later photograph, you'll see across the field beyond, we're having swung round to the right of that photograph. We're now again seeing a little bit of the application site, but also a more open view to the woodland, beg your pardon, the farmland beyond. And if we swing round again to the right of that photograph and step into the site slightly, you'll see the timber fence on the right-hand side, which is basically the back boundary fence as it stands at the moment to Brookside. And we look at the main part of the application site, looking and say now in a southerly direction, that's the direction towards the burn. We move from that down further into the site. We move into the area where it goes beyond the application site in the foreground into the remainder of the garden ground beyond that, stretching from the application site towards the burn. This is us again looking in that southerly direction. From there, if we step down further, we go and look in the reverse direction now, as it were. So this is us almost at the end of that strip of ground next to the burn, looking back to the application site, looking across, say, garden ground, which is down at that lower level. You'll notice there's a bit of a slope and difference in levels down to this lower level. The application site being out with the floodplain area from the burn. And then if we go slightly to the left of that photograph, we, as it were, look over the vegetation into the area between Brookside and the burn. And as again, you can see Brookside is set up above that lower sort of small field area, and the blue line is basically the line back on the public road. So this is, as we say, land to the south, but we're looking back towards the public road and the back of Brookside. From there, we swing slightly to the right of that photograph, in fact, all the way around, I should have said. And this is just to give you an impression of the countryside to the east, the openness of that, and we're picking up part of the back of the hills there as well, and the woodland beyond. So moving on from that photograph, we now step back into the application site, and we're, as it were, going to go in the opposite direction, back up the access road now. And this is to give you an impression of the rear of Dunvegan from within the application site. As you can see, there's a number of polytunnels and greenhouses and small sheds, as well as a garage in that particular location. And then if we swing to the left of that, in the next photograph, again within the application site, we're looking at the buildings at the back of Brookside this time, from within the application site. And from there, if we go further up the access road, we look back into the rear elevation of Brookside, and we're looking at the gable of the garage serving Brookside, which of course has been extended by a sort of the green timber outbuilding added on to a sort of garden building, as it were. And then from that position, if we move to the next slide, we move round to the other side of the garage. The main building, just to give you an indication of the dimensions of it there, it's effectively, if you like, similar to a double garage. And I make reference to this, of course, because the applicant makes reference to the building being equivalent to a cottage in terms of the policy. So just to give you the dimensions of that. So we can move to the next photograph. I'll just leave you with that general photograph of the site itself. Turning first of all to the summary of the applicant's case, planning permission in principle for a house was granted on appeal in 2010, a consent that was renewed in 2013, but has subsequently lapsed. This application is effectively for the same proposal. In terms of the definition of a building group, it is accepted that there are only 2 rather than 3 houses at this location. However, there is also a large ancillary building which is considered to be an equivalent size to a traditional cottage. Consequently, it is considered that the proposal complies with the spirit of Category 1 building groups of Local Development Plan Policy 19 and the associated guidance. It is also seen as reflecting the Council's objective of balancing the need to protect outstanding landscapes while encouraging appropriate housing development in rural areas. The site is not assessed as being within a designated local landscape area or within the open countryside, because it's located next to two existing houses. It is of a small scale, I should say, and would not be detrimental to the amenity of the existing houses or the wider landscape. It is recognised that there is a subjective aspect to such assessments. The guidance indicates that, even where there are 3 houses, an additional site may not be acceptable. In this case, the site is seen as, and I quote, readily identifiable and a readily identifiable adjacent site. The site has been the subject of former industrial use as a sawmill. As such, it is considered reasonable for the site to be viewed as brownfield land. The decontamination of the site would provide an environmental improvement. The original appeal decision is a material planning consideration. The reporter opined that the buildings formed, and I quote, a fairly compact shape with some sense of place, end of quotation, that an additional house would, open quotations, help to consolidate the group, that the proposal accorded with, and again I quote, the spirit, end of quote, of the policy at that time, and would, quote, result in net environmental benefit. In the applicant's view, the officer has not considered the reporter's reasoning, and that considerable weight should be given to this decision. The applicant has drawn attention to his personal circumstances regarding his wife's ill health. He hopes to be able to use the proceeds from selling the proposed plot to defray the costs of her residential home fees. The proposal does not raise any technical objections regarding access, residential amenity, or flooding. Issues relating to the local mining risk, education contribution, and land contamination could be addressed through planning conditions. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the planning history of the site and the findings of the appeal decision are noted and recognised by the planning officer. However, the policy position has changed since the granting of the original permission, and the supplementary guidance is now seen as much clearer regarding the requirements both under Category 1 building groups and Category 6 brownfield land. As the site is out with any settlement boundary, this proposal falls to be assessed against the current Local Development Plan, Policy 19, and the associated Housing in the Countryside Guide 2020. Current application is not considered to comply with the Housing in the Countryside policy or guidance. Turning to Category 1, building groups, this defines a group as 3 or more existing buildings of a size at least equivalent to traditional cottage and which, when viewed within their landscape setting, appear as a group. Premises which are smaller than a traditional cottage, such as domestic garages and outbuildings, do not count towards the requirement for at least 3 buildings. The existing outbuildings are not seen as being equivalent to a traditional cottage. Consequently, the proposal is not considered to comply within Category 1. Regarding Category 6, brownfield land, the policy has been tightened up considerably since the reporter's decision. To be considered as rural brownfield land, the site would have to have been so damaged by a former use that it cannot be left to naturalise or be reused for another purpose without first being improved. The site is currently being used as garden ground. Consequently, it is not assessed as brownfield land. The previous consent has lapsed, therefore the proposal falls to be assessed in relation to current policy, guidance, and any material planning considerations. The officer concludes the proposal does not meet any of the categories of the currently adopted Housing in the Countryside supplementary guidance. It is noted that the proposal does not raise any concerns regarding access, residential amenity, or flood risk. Matters of land contamination, potential ground gas reduction, coal mining risk, and education contribution could be addressed through a planning condition in the event of planning permission being granted. In this case, there has been a representation from the Coal Authority regarding ground conditions, and also from Kinross Civic Trust regarding the proposal not according with local development plan policy, as there are only 2 houses and there is therefore no building group. In this case, there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Harrison. It's very interesting. Councillor Drysdale, do you have any questions on this matter?
Thank you, Convener. No, again, thank you to Mr. Harrison, an extremely comprehensive report and well illustrated, and I'm clear on the situation. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, any questions?
Just one brief question, Convener. In relation to the reasons for refusal given on page 261, I think in the planning officer's assessment, Mr. Harrison, they've talked about building groups and they've talked about Brownfield land, but I think the report, on the other hand, does indicate that the site has a degree of containment and setting in relation to trees and so on, and some of the other objections that would possibly apply to such an application do not apply to this one. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yes, hopefully the photographs were of some help there to show you the extent of the, if you like, the maturity, if I can put it that way, of the existing trees on the boundary, and you may have picked up even a certain amount of evidence of a small orchard at the northern end of the site as well. So yes, the site clearly has some maturity, and even the photograph you have at the moment shows a degree of enclosure, and it was one of the reasons for showing you the contrast between that and the openness of the farmland beyond.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Mr. Harrison. Thank you, Convener.
Yes, I've got a question too. This went to a reporter at one time, and it was deemed to be suitable for a house. Has our policies changed since that was granted?
Yes, there has been, shall we say, I'll maybe put it this way, there's been no fundamental change in policy, but shall we say, I think as a result of experience in different circumstances, the policies have been tested to some extent over the years, and that's resulted in a revision, and as the officer said, generally speaking, a tightening up, if I can put it that way, excuse me, in terms of the wording to try and be more, shall we say, specific in the circumstances. For example, in relation to brownfield land, the degree of environmental improvement, there's been further qualifications as to those circumstances. So the improvement needs to be, shall we say, more specific. And there was always a slight, you may remember, a difficulty where there were buildings or buildings had been removed as to how that matter was handled as the degree of environmental improvement. So that matter has been considerably clarified since then. And maybe if I, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for that. There's a mention of a sawmill. Is there any records that, is this just part of the sawmill, or is that the entirety of the sawmill in this Brownfield site?
Yes, I'm aware of that. By way of, maybe, I hope this isn't introducing too much in the way of new information, but in response to your question, it was a matter I touched on as I happened to meet the applicant on site. The reference to the sawmill, how he described it anyway, was more in the context as there was a small business which was involved in recovering and recycling wood, and there may have been a certain amount of milling as part of that. But I think, as you can probably see from the photograph, there's no, I should say, obvious evidence on the ground which would actually show you the nature of the sawmilling activity which took place in the past. But I understand it was a relatively small-scale business in comparison to the total application site.
Yes, that if it was just that site, I would agree. That's great. Right, if that's all the questions, can members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Councillor Drysdale?
Yes, happy so to do.
Councillor Wilson?
Yes, convener, happy to proceed.
I am happy to proceed too. So, Councillor Wilson, can you start off the debate? Okay,
thanks, convener. Thanks again to Mr. Harrison for an extremely detailed report, but also one where the pictures were very helpful. I'm not familiar with the site, although I'm familiar with the area, and I love the title Great North Road, convener, entering into the application. However, on to formal business. I found this a more difficult one. I think the site has got something going for it in terms of containment. My question kind of alluded to that, and the site is contained with trees, bushes, shrubs, etc. However, it doesn't comply with the houses in the countryside policy in terms of there's 2 dwellings there already of reasonable small to medium proportions. There are not 3, and there really hasn't been sufficient evidence produced by the applicant to say there's a justification for departing from the policy. There's a personal matter which I can understand and empathise with, but however that doesn't really have a bearing on the detail of the planning considerations, I'm afraid. It's also not a brownfield site. Clearly not, or there hasn't been sufficient evidence produced to support that in any way that would indicate that there are no alternative uses, because it's clearly been a garden ground area for some time. So I found that balance quite difficult, convener, but I ended up coming down on the side of the planning report. The other thing that I would want to add is that I take quite seriously the letter on page 283 from the Coal Authority. We don't get many, I don't think we get very many representations to that degree from the Coal Authority, and it certainly gives us a note for caution, and therefore I think that's a consideration in the determination of this. My final comment, convener, is in relation to the appeal. The appeal to the reporter was made in terms of LDP 1 or LDP, not in terms of LDP 2, and we need to take into account that if this went to appeal, which because we've got the LRB now it doesn't, but if this had gone to appeal, the reporter would have had to take into account LDP 2 the same as we do. So I therefore think, although the previous appeal that was won as a material consideration, it's not so material that it overwhelms the view, and it was given under the old policy and we're now in the new policy, I suppose is a simple way to put it. So I would be in favour of not allowing the review and going along with the planners on this one, and I can narrate the detail in due course once we hear the others.
Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I am again supportive of Councillor Wilson's conclusion, and agree it was a more balanced one than some of the other applications we've seen today. But I do conclude that I am supportive of the proposals just put forward or summarised by Councillor Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, I realise the applicant's personal circumstances, and I have every sympathy with him. But as my 2 colleagues
Convener, I don't have much to add. First of all, we learn something every day. I thought a Frisian was a cow, but apparently there's something different about it. And I say we learn, live and learn. The reasons for refusal, there's only one minor typographical thing, I think on line 4, in the middle of that line, there are not 3 existing buildings at the site, not as the site, and that's just a typo. And I'd seek Mr. Elliott's advice on the advisability of adding in a second reason given the letter from the Coal Authority, but I think the reference would be to policy 58B, but I'll leave Mr. Elliott to articulate his thoughts on that.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Yes, I can see that there's a typo on ground of refusal number 1 on the 4th line, so the word as becomes the word at. Now, Councillor Wilson, you did say in your decision that you were concerned about the Coal Authority position. They, of course, have indicated that they would be they object, but they would be looking for a report. I think, Councillor Wilson, going on what you said, it would be along the additional ground of refusal will be along the lines of the proposal is contrary to policy 58B of the Perth Kinross Local Development Plan 2 in brackets 2019, as it has not been demonstrated that the site and adjacent land can be made safe and stable for development to proceed in the absence of a coal report.
I'm content with that, Convener.
Convener and Councillor Drysdale, are you content with, I have to address that to you, that's Councillor Wilson made specific reference to that in his decision. Councillor Drysdale was concurring, and I think Councillor Anderson, but do you agree with the those changes in the addition of ground 2?
Yes, I agree. Right. If that's you caught up, Mr. Elliott, we'll go on to.
That's it.
We'll go on to the last item, which is installation of replacement windows, Fernbank 50 Main Street, Longforgan. Mr. Harrison, can you give us the presentation on this one?
Thank you, Convener. This is a detailed planning application for the installation of 3 replacement windows at Fernbank Main Street, Longforgan. The proposal concerns the frontage of a semi-detached, single-storey, traditional stone and slate cottage facing onto the public road. The existing windows are of a 2-pane, single-glazed casement style. The site lies within the Longforgan Conservation Area. I'll just take you straight to the photographs now, but you might like to have page 323 onwards, providing the location plan, site plan, and of course drawings of both the existing and the proposed windows. And of course, you'll have noted that the applicant themselves have also submitted photographs illustrating a number of other windows in the immediate locality. The general sequence of the photographs will be the adjoining cottages, then Fernbank and its window, and then the adjoining windows. So I say in the first photograph we have here, we have the adjoining cottages number 44 and 46 beyond, and then the other half, if I can put it that way, number 48 of the pair of semi-detached cottages which the applicant has submitted applications for. So you can see the general nature of that immediate part of the conservation area. So if we step back a little bit from that in the next photograph, we see the pair of cottages forming number 50, that's Fernbank itself, and then number 48. So the three windows involved you can see in this photograph. And then if we move on from that photograph into the next one, we get a detail of the window itself, or one of the windows, they're all identical, of one of the windows serving Fernbank Cottage. So I'll maybe just let you have a look at that for a moment. But you can see it's a casement style window with the upper pane capable of opening, whereas the lower pane is fixed, as it were. So it shall we say, swings out. You'll note that when these were installed, that they didn't include the perma-vents, which are referred to later on, but they are, shall we say, relatively modern windows. They're not original sash and case windows, as you can see, they're casement windows. So if we move to the next photograph, this, as it says, is the window number 48. That's the other half, as it were, of the cottage, including Fernbank. As you can see, this is also a modern window, albeit it follows much more closely to a sash and case style, albeit a modern interpretation of a sash and case style. But the modern aspect, of course, is the installation of the perma-vent. It gives the impression of being a sliding window, but in fact it's a casement style window. So in other words, the lower part is fixed and the upper part swings open. So what would be in a sash and case window, what are called the horns, in other words, the bits that, so we say, stretch down from the upper pane are present, but they don't, I should say, function in a sliding sense. What you may also notice with this window is there's a slight difference in proportions, with the upper part being smaller than the lower part. It's not a 50-50 division. So if we move on to the next window, this is number 46 now. This takes on much more of a sash and case style. You'll notice that the surrounds to the window are much slimmer than in the previous windows. And also we see astragals have been introduced. So you've got two panes, it's a 50-50 upper and lower arrangement, but the astragals are one, shall we say, affixed to the outside of the glass. Again, it's not an original window, it's a replacement, relatively modern window, but follows much more closely to the sash and case style of a window. So we then move on to the final window, which is number 44, so we're moving away. We again have a more modern window, slightly different interpretation again. It has as you can see, the perma-vent at the top of the window again, and it has divisions into astragals as well. And again, the surround detail is slightly different from before. Some of these windows can be both sliding and casement in style in terms of their opening, but it was a cold day, so none of the windows were open, so I can't be 100% sure in terms of the detail of that. So we move on to the final photograph. It just takes us back, as it were, to the example of the existing windows at Fernbank. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, the existing top opening single glazed casement windows are not original and differ from those in the adjoining half of the building. The proposed double glazed top opening UPVC windows would minimise maintenance, improve insulation, and be sustainable in the long term. It is recognised that the frames would be slightly heavier, but this is not viewed as being unsympathetic to the appearance of the building. Trickle vents would also be installed. It is understood that the planning department prefers any astragals to be sandwiched within the double glazing. All of the features of the proposed windows can be seen in a number of other houses in the immediate locality. In conclusion, the replacement windows are seen as an improvement to the character of the conservation area and would be more in keeping with those of adjoining properties. It is emphasised that there is much variation in the style of windows in the vicinity, and this is not a major development. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the principle of replacing the existing windows is acceptable. However, the specific details of this proposal need to be considered due to the location of the site within the Longforgan Conservation Area. The proposal involves the replacement of timber casement windows with UPVC windows. The combination of the broader frame dimensions and the lack of depth in profile in comparison to a traditional sash and case window, together with the installation of modern features of non-structural astragals sandwiched within the double glazing and trickle vents, are seen as detrimental to the character and appearance of the conservation area. In this case, there are no representations. There is, however, a request for a site visit, but there is no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. Councillor Drysdale, have you any questions on this item?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Councillor Wilson, have you got any questions on this?
No questions, Convener. No questions.
Thank you. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information before us? That is information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Councillor Drysdale.
Yes, happy so to do.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes, happy to proceed.
Thank you. I will open the debate on this one. I find that this is quite galling because this is someone trying to reduce the carbon footprint of their house, and they've put in an application and it doesn't quite fit with the policy. However, I think we have to be pragmatic on this. We have no idea if the applicant is in a position to go away and find another solution that would be perhaps more acceptable. And when I see the windows that they have in already, my view is that I would actually support the applicant and grant this one. And we'll see what others have to say, and no doubt Mr. Elliott will want me to narrate this better if it was considered appropriate. Councillor Drysdale.
Right, camera. Yeah, similarly, Convener, I'm quite sympathetic to this one. You know, like you say, it's you know, we've this morning I know I'm not supposed to refer to other cases, but we've seen some black and white cases. This one is much more shade of grey, and you know, I am tending towards agreeing with a recommendation or a proposal to approve what the applicant is looking for here.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. This is quite finely balanced because I think we have planning staff who we ask to implement the policy, and clearly the report has done that. But I'm not totally convinced that what is in the planning report is maybe the the total story here. First of all, I think the proposed window replacement would be an improvement on what's there already. I'm very familiar with the main street in Longforgan since I grew up there, and I know the history of many of the houses. And there's been a whole series of improvements done to a whole lot of properties and throughout the village. But there are other types of windows that are around that are, I think, of a reasonable standard and a reasonable quality and a reasonable appearance. And I use that word reasonable because I think that's what the man in the street might judge. But that's not necessarily the gift of our planning officers, and I'm defending their report and their decision because I think they've stuck to it. And I think in this one, convener, on balance, but it's pretty carefully balanced, I would think we've got the leeway to agree that this proposal could go ahead with I presume suitable conditions that no doubt you and Mr. Elliott will be able to narrate. So I would, on balance, go with supporting the review.
Right, Mr. Elliott, that's unanimous. So we've unanimously decided to uphold this appeal. Have you any comments or wish to change anything?
As a matter, I want to draw out some clarity here, convener. The main thing you're looking at is whether it, yes, you're looking at the character and appearance of the conservation area, but it's really the preservation or enhancement of the conservation area is kind of the legal test. And I want to tease out whether you think it does meet it and therefore accords with legislation in the plan, or whether you're actually saying it doesn't quite meet it, but there are material considerations that indicate we should grant it. And I wasn't quite clear in what you were saying. I appreciate you're all saying it's finely balanced.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that one is seeing the windows as they are now, and though the proposed windows are not meeting fully the standards, they are so close to it that we feel that it's justified in allowing this proposal to go ahead.
Well, I think, I think what you're saying is, whilst not quite preserving and enhancing conservation area, taking in the whole circumstances, including replacement of existing windows, and maybe perhaps the styles in the area that you feel it should be granted. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
Right, okay. So essentially you're saying it doesn't quite meet the test of preserving and enhancing, but there are material considerations that indicate why this one should be granted.
Yes, that's correct. Okay.
I'm taking it that both Councillor Wilson and Drysdale agree with that as well.
Yes.
Councillor Drysdale?
Sorry, I got the wrong button there. Yes, I agree. Yep.
Right, thank you very much, and thank you for helping us with that, Mr. Elliott. That was good. Thank you. So that will be the end of today's local review body, and thank you all very much. Thank Mr. Harrison for, as I say, this is the first time I think we've done 5, and we've managed to get it done before 1 o'clock. I hope that's okay for you, Councillor Drysdale, because I know you're going elsewhere after. And thank you, Willie, for coming along too. That's good. Thank you very much. And we'll sign off now. Thank you.
Okay.